Romans 12:2 explained, "Let God rebuild your mind." You have never once thought a fully original thought. That sentence should unsettle you a little before it comforts you. Almost everything running through your mind right now, what counts as success, what makes you valuable, what you're supposed to be afraid of, what a good life looks like, was handed to you by something outside of you, long before you ever examined it. Paul knew this 2,000 years ago, writing to a church living inside an empire that had its own relentless machinery for shaping a person's mind. "Do not conform to the pattern of this world," he wrote, "but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Romans 12:2. That single verse contains an entire theology of thought, identity, and freedom. And today we are moving slowly through it, one movement at a time, the way you would move through a piece of music rather than a checklist. Movement 1. The pattern you mistook for yourself. The word Paul uses for conform, syschematizo, is a shaping word. It describes something being pressed into an external mold, the way wet clay takes the exact shape of whatever container holds it. Paul is not warning about obvious sin here, so much as something quieter and far more pervasive. The slow, invisible process by which a surrounding culture presses its assumptions into a person until those assumptions no longer feel like assumptions at all. They feel like you. Think about how much of your internal monologue is not actually yours. The anxiety about how you compare to others. The quiet certainty that busyness equals worth. The reflex to scroll the moment silence appears. None of this arrived through careful reasoning. It arrived through repetition, exposure, and the ordinary pressure of the room you have spent your life standing in. You did not choose most of your default reactions. You absorbed them, the way a plant absorbs the direction of available light, bending itself without ever deciding to bend. This is the uncomfortable starting point of Romans 12:2. Before transformation can mean anything, you have to accept that a significant portion of what currently feels like your personality is actually a pattern, borrowed, inherited, pressed into you by a world that had no interest in your flourishing, only your compliance. The mind cannot be renewed until it first admits it was shaped by something other than truth. Movement 2. The altar where attention becomes formation. Paul does not arrive at verse 2 in isolation. The verse before it describes offering your body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, true and proper worship. Romans 12:1. This ordering matters enormously. Worship precedes transformation, and worship, at its most basic definition, is simply the object of your sustained attention. Whatever holds your attention long enough eventually becomes the altar where your mind is formed, whether you ever called it worship or not. This means the question is never really whether you worship something. The question is only, what? A life spent giving its best attention to comparison, to outrage, to entertainment, to the approval of strangers, is a life offering its mind daily on an altar that will inevitably shape it into the image of whatever it kept looking at. You become, slowly and without noticing the transition, a reflection of wherever your attention has lived the longest. This is why renewal cannot simply be a decision to think more positively. It has to be a redirection of attention itself, toward Scripture, toward prayer, toward the kind of stillness that lets truth settle rather than skim across the surface. The mind is not renewed by force of will alone. It is renewed the way any altar changes what it produces, by what gets laid on it day after day, long enough for the shape to actually take. Movement 3. The desire beneath the thought. Here is where most attempts at mental transformation quietly fail because they treat thoughts as the root problem rather than the fruit of something deeper. James writes that each person is tempted when drawn away and enticed by their own desire, and then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. James 1:14-15. Notice the order. Desire comes first. Thought is often simply desire's translator, converting an appetite into a justification the conscious mind can accept. This means you cannot renew your mind by managing thoughts alone, the way you cannot fix a river by rearranging the water on its surface. You have to look upstream at what you actually want, what you are hungry for beneath the thought you are currently thinking. The bitter thought about someone who wronged you is often desire for justice curdled into desire for their suffering. The anxious thought about your future is often a legitimate desire for security, twisted into a demand that you control what was never yours to control. Paul's language of transformation, not mere behavior modification, matters precisely because it goes here, to the desires generating the thoughts, not just the thoughts themselves. A mind renewed at the level of desire eventually stops producing the old thoughts altogether, the way a redirected river eventually stops eroding the banks it used to wear down every season. Movement 4. Learning to test what once controlled you. The second half of Romans 12:2 gives the actual method. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. The word for test, dokimazo, was used for assaying precious metal, holding it to fire to determine whether it was genuine or counterfeit. This is not passive reflection. It is active, deliberate examination. Practically, this means developing the habit of holding your own automatic thoughts up to scrutiny instead of accepting them simply because they arrived first and loudest. When a thought shows up demanding your agreement, you are worthless, you deserve this outburst, everyone like you always ends up alone. The renewed mind does not simply obey it. It asks, is this actually gold? Or does this only look like gold under the wrong light? It tests the thought against Scripture, against the fruit it consistently produces, against what a person walking closely with God would recognize as true. Most people never do this. They let every thought that arrives with enough emotional force cast an automatic vote in how they live, without ever holding it up to any fire at all. Learning to test what once simply controlled you is not cold rationalism. It is the precise discipline Paul is describing. The willingness to stop assuming a thought's intensity is proof of its truth. Movement 5. The slow miracle of becoming new. The word Paul chooses for transformed, metamorpho, is the same root behind the word metamorphosis, the process by which a caterpillar does not simply add wings to its old body, but is broken down entirely and rebuilt into something with a fundamentally different shape. This is not decoration. It is not a fresh coat of paint over an old structure. It is total, patient reconstruction from the inside. And crucially, it is slow. Paul describes this same process elsewhere as an ongoing transformation from one degree of glory to another, 2 Corinthians 3:18, a phrase that assumes gradual movement, not instant arrival. If your mind has spent decades absorbing a particular pattern, no single sermon, verse, or emotional high will fully undo it in one sitting. The chrysalis stage is unglamorous, invisible, and looks from the outside like almost nothing is happening. It is, in fact, where nearly everything is happening. This should relieve you rather than discourage you. You are not failing simply because the old thought patterns still occasionally surface. Metamorphosis, by definition, includes a season where the old and new coexist uncomfortably, where you still recognize the caterpillar you used to be, even as new structure is quietly forming beneath the surface. The presence of the old pattern is not evidence the process has failed. It is evidence the process is still underway. Final movement. Let the old room lose its authority. Imagine the pattern you were conformed to as a room you lived inside for years, familiar, poorly lit, but predictable enough that you mistook its shape for the shape of reality itself. Renewal does not usually mean the door to that old room is instantly bricked over and sealed shut forever. More often, you simply find yourself spending less time there. The furniture is still recognizable when you happen to walk back in, but it no longer has the authority it once had over what you believe about yourself, about God, about what is actually true. That is the quiet target of Romans 12:2. Not a dramatic single moment where the old self vanishes, but a mind that increasingly tests what it hears, increasingly notices which altar its attention has been laid on, increasingly asks what desire is generating this thought before agreeing to obey it. Slowly, almost without a specific day you could name on a calendar, the old room stops being where you live. It becomes simply a room you used to live in, its walls no longer dictating the shape of anything new. You were never asked to argue the old pattern out of existence through sheer willpower. You were asked to offer your mind daily, attentively, patiently, onto a different altar, and trust that the same God who designed metamorphosis into the created order is capable of doing the same slow, faithful work in you. The mind that was pressed into shape by the world can be unpressed, reshaped, made new. Not overnight, but certainly, and not by your strength alone, but by the renewing only God can perform. Let the old room lose its authority. Something new is already, quietly, taking shape.